Hey guys, Tom Taylor with Rock News Desk coming at you. Here's a really cool story about a friendship a music journalist kind of fell into with the one and only Eddie Van Halen. The story starts in 2015. A former music journalist named Blair Fisher was fighting the boredom of his workday as a market researcher for a health insurance company when he discovered his old login for LexisNexis had never been deactivated. LexisNexis is a company that provides customers with database management services. It contains a huge database used by lawyers and journalists that contain a person's contact information, criminal records, and stuff like that. Fisher said he found some interesting people in the database and decided to randomly email them. Those were people like Gene Simmons, Eddie Vedder, Stevie Nicks, and the guys in Guns N' Roses. None of them ever replied. His thinking was the emails were probably not even valid or legitimate email addresses, or maybe they were just out of date. Of the email addresses he found was one for Eddie Van Halen. The address was an AOL address, and who was actually using an AOL address in 2015? So Fisher assumed this email address was probably invalid, but hey, why not send a message anyway? I would have. Now, before I reveal what the first email said, I want to make sure we are all on the same page with what was happening in Van Halen at the time. By 2015, Sammy Hagar was gone from the band. The vocalist from Extreme, Gary Cherone, joined in 1996, and the band released an album, Van Halen 3, that didn't sell so well, and almost no one liked. Cherone was out in 1999, and Van Halen was doing a lot of nothing. Sammy returned in 2004 for a reunion tour. The tour sold well, but Sammy called it a disaster because of Eddie's substance abuse. Sammy said he wanted to stop the tour, but the contract he signed prevented him from leaving. 2 years later, in 2006, Lee Roth was back in the lineup for a North American tour. This time, however, the Van Halen brothers had replaced their bassist, Michael Anthony, with Eddie's son, Wolfgang. Supposedly, Anthony was never told he was being replaced. He wasn't fired. The band just announced Wolfgang was the new bassist. Anthony had been playing with Sammy off and on since Hagar left, and apparently the Van Halens weren't fond of that. So Michael Anthony was out by 2006. In 2012, the band released their 12th studio album, A Different Kind of Truth. It was the first without Anthony and the first with Wolfgang on bass. It was mostly a rehash of old material that had never been released, and for many fans, the high Michael Anthony harmonies were really missed. Now, back to 2015 and the email Fisher decided to send to Eddie Van Halen. Fisher just sent 4 words. How's Michael Anthony doing? The next morning, Fisher was shocked to see a return email. There's no way this could really be the Eddie Van Halen, right? An AOL address? He said his insides fluttered a bit when he saw it. I would have had a full-on adrenaline rush, if not a panic attack. He opened the email and read the response. It said, "Not nearly as good as Wolfgang Van Halen, nor will he ever be. Who the fuck is this? You would know that if you had a brain and ears." Fisher was shocked, and then noticed next to the email address at the top is a name, Eddie Van Halen. Could this really be Eddie? An impersonator? He wasn't convinced it was the real Eddie, so he continued his trolling. He writes back, "Regardless, you screwed up the classic lineup, and with all due respect to your son, with Lee Roth's voice in the shitter, you need Anthony now more than ever. And how about some new music you didn't write in 1975? You are super lazy." He said a few hours later, 5 new emails arrived. He categorized them as full of rage and kind of a stream of consciousness. It sounds like Eddie was unhappy with that last message. Fisher didn't provide the entirety of the emails, but gave the highlights. He said the writer said he couldn't control Roth's voice. "And now you think Mike is a lead singer?" reads one email. "He sounds like Mickey Mouse. He just has a high voice." The email went on to say Roth was to blame for leaving the band in the first place, and it was never the same after Sammy came aboard. The last email of that batch read, "This is the last thing I'm going to say. When Hagar quit, Mike went with him instead of staying with Alex and me. That was as much of a betrayal as Roth blindsiding us when he quit. We didn't see either one coming. All we had was ourselves, Alex and me. Wolf happened to be there, and it's fun again. Life has changed. I can't control it any more than you can. If I could, I would change a lot of things, starting with never having my first drink and maybe sticking to piano instead of guitar." Wow. Fisher calls that, quote, a lot to unpack, and he isn't wrong. In that one paragraph, Eddie gives his thoughts on 2 members of the original band betraying him. He laments ever picking up an alcoholic drink and even suggests it could have been a mistake to play guitar instead of sticking with the piano. That last part alone would have been life-altering for an entire generation of guitarists. I mean, Eddie wasn't going to change the music world through the piano, certainly not the rock and roll music world. Now, Eddie's substance abuse has been pretty well documented over the years, so I won't go deep into that. But he has said he had his first drink before he was a teenager, and drank and smoked most of his adult life. He was diagnosed with cancer in 2000 and had part of his tongue removed. He went to rehab on a few or more occasions, including in 2007, so he definitely had had some health struggles. Fisher, being a big Van Halen fan, knew these things about the real Eddie Van Halen, and just maybe this was really him. So he decided to soften his tone just in case this really was his hero, the real Edward Van Halen. He sent another email hoping to get a reply. It read, "Damn, okay, didn't mean to get you all riled up. Maybe Mike was mad because Van Halen wasn't doing anything for years. I mean, it took, 15 years to do Truth? Just saying." When the next email arrives, Fisher said he realized he was most likely talking to the real Eddie. Eddie replied, "I get riled up because I'm always the one who gets blamed for everything. The reason it took that long for Truth is Roth, including all the rehashed demos. He wrote Roth was the reason the band has nothing but a live record to show for 3 years downtime," referring to 2015's Tokyo Dome Live and Concert album. Eddie continues by writing, "Roth is out of his mind." He explains Roth is not interested in rock and roll, only likes dance music, and hates bands like AC/DC. He then went on to say he loves AC/DC, and they were the band that inspired songs like Panama, Drop Dead Legs, and Good Enough. He went on, "I have no outlet. It's very frustrating. If people only knew the truth, they wouldn't believe some of the shit that goes on and what we put up with. Probably not much longer, though. I'm too old for this shit. I really wish things were different, but they're not. All the best, man." By this time, Fisher said he was convinced. For this not to be Eddie, there's just no way. So a couple days later, he pens another email. This time, he asks Eddie why he is telling him all this stuff. Eddie replies, I asked myself the same question, and there are actually a few reasons. For one, whenever we do interviews, we can't really tell the whole truth, because if I said in an interview what I have said to you, certain people would get pissed. It wouldn't do much good to say that I think our own lead singer sucks and is a complete mental case, prima donna. It's almost a strange kind of therapy to tell the truth to someone you don't even know. Make any sense to you? When Fisher emails back, he tells Eddie his name, that he is a huge Van Halen fan, and he tells him he used to be a music journalist and says he hopes to meet him a month later when Van Halen plays Tinley Park near his Chicago home. Eddie replies, "Well, hi Blair. I had a feeling, but that's neither here nor there." He signs the email, Ed. The two continue their correspondence. Over the next few weeks, the two email and text back and forth several times a week. Leading up to the Tinley Van Halen show, Eddie tells Fisher he had just had some tests run and he is cancer-free. "That's more important than anything," Fisher replies. "If you don't have your health, you got nothing." Eddie tells him he and Roth do not get along at all. He tells him Roth had been talking to Alex at least, but even that has stopped. He says, "I don't know what I ever did to him, but so it goes. I wouldn't be surprised if he somehow implodes on stage or does something really, really stupid." When the Tinley Park show arrives, Fisher and his friend head to the backstage area and wait to be escorted in to see Eddie. Eddie opens the door, peeks through, and asks, "Which one is Blair?" When Fisher responds, "Me," Eddie takes a look at him, pulls him in for a big hug. The next thing Eddie says is, "Fucking Roth," and then continues ranting about Dave's vocals and attitude. Fisher and Eddie continue their email and texting friendship. After the tour is done, Fisher suggests to Eddie that he bring back Sammy Hagar because he is still capable of singing. Eddie replies that he doesn't think it would work because Michael Anthony would be a part of the package and he doesn't think he could play with him after playing with Wolfgang. Through their communications, Fisher categorizes Eddie's attitude towards Dave as fueled by Dave's inability to sing the songs and his egomania. With Sammy, however, it feels different. Eddie claims Sammy was using the band to further himself and his brand. "He just can't open his mouth without saying Van Halen," Eddie explained. This incredible, improbable friendship continues. In late August or early September 2017, Eddie messaged Fisher to tell him he had stage 3 lung cancer. A month or so later, Eddie begins describing the treatments and procedures he's going through to battle the cancer. Fisher has those difficult conversations with Eddie, but often tries to keep the conversation light. Whether it's talking about little ladies backstage with gloves and hairnets digging through M&Ms to remove all the brown ones, or talking about House of Cards on Netflix, Fisher seemed to be doing his best to just be a good friend. The two stay in touch while Eddie continues his battle with cancer. Throughout the entirety of the next couple years, Eddie seems confident he will win and Van Halen will be back. In 2019, Roth does an interview where he alludes to Eddie's health, saying, "I'm the face of Van Halen from this point on, most likely. I'm not sure what's happening with Ed, but he's probably not going to answer the bell this time." That Roth interview prompts Eddie to tell Fisher, Van Halen is never finished. He is and was finished a long time ago. Eddie then tells him he is considering a tour with everybody. Maybe we can catch it in time before both whack jobs lose it completely and get the whole shebang up there, he says. Wolf open, Roth and Hagar swap every other song, and we squeeze Mike in somewhere. I just don't think Al's going to go for it. But you never know. Stranger things have happened. Once 2020 rolled around and the pandemic hit, Ed seemed less available, Fisher said. He said his text messages used to be so long, he'd sometimes only skim through them. He would sometimes have to cut Eddie off before he was going to go to bed. Now, it took longer for Ed to reply, and the messages were shorter. A couple months after Eddie had a back surgery, Fisher read on TMZ that Eddie had passed away from cancer. He said he closed the door to his office, collapsed on the love seat, buried his face in his hands, and cried. Fisher goes on to explain how much Eddie meant to him. He talks about the man, the musician, and the friendship. He talks about the missed tour opportunities, like what Wolfgang had dubbed the kitchen sink tour, with all the former Van Halen members. Fisher does a fantastic job of telling this story. He wrote the entire story for an article in Rolling Stone, and I highly suggest you look it up. I purposely left out a lot of details of my retelling, such as the double exclamation marks, to leave plenty of meat on the bone for you to read. Check that out if you have the time. Thank you so much for watching. Please check out the other videos here on Rock News Desk and on our sister channel, Rock News Quickies. Take care.